Welcome everybody. We're going to start again our last session, the third session on this fourth EBT webinar. Sorry, because I make here a mistake. So the third session is going to be a panel discussion with all the members and all the presenters of today's webinar, plus some additions from the audience, especially on Q&As or questions or participation that we may need from you guys. First, we're going to start with a speech by Christian Norden from the Air Crew Training Policy Group. And then the hosting of these panelists will be mostly on Frederick Morman from the NLR. So I will introduce now both of them. I will start with Christian. Christian Norden is an Austrian citizen. He started his career in 1975 with Austrian Airlines, and he served in this company as a pilot. He's an instructor and examiner in various, and he had various management functions. In 2007, he joined Airbus and became part of the EBT creation group, the IATA ATQI. He led the competency-based training, grading, and assessment system in Airbus, starting with the new 350 concept, the introduction of the kind of a mixed implementation of the type rating of the Airbus 350 in 2014. In 2019 and 2020, development-based briefing concept in Airbus. Christian is a member of the ASA Aircrew Training Policy Group. Is the focal point for all competency-based training in the subgroup of the ATPG, and he's helping us especially on the creation and the development of the EBT Manual. He's also an advisory to the ICAO Personal Training and Licensing Panel. He's still an active type rating instructor and examiner on the 350, 330, and 320. And Christian has a doctoral degree in law by the University of Vienna. So welcome, Christian. And I'm going to also introduce before the speech of your speech, Christian, I would like to introduce Frederick Morman from the Royal Netherlands Aerospace Center. Currently spearhead NLR's program to contribute to the safe, effective, and implementation of the EBT and the EBT regulation within Europe and globally around the world. Frederick has a background in aerospace engineering with a focus on operational safety and human performance. At the NLR, Frederick has engaged in several research projects and programs in the area of human factors, resilience operation, and new training concept, such a blended learning environment. In this role at NLR's EBT program, Frederick is the EBT program manager, and he has engaged with us, with the ASA, in the rulemaking task 0599 for evidence-based training. He also engaged with the IATA training task force, and most recently, he has been driving innovation into the aviation blended learning environment. So welcome to both of you. I give the floor to Christian, and then Christian, I guess you will, Frederick will take over, and both of you will host the next session. So Christian, welcome.
Thank you, Francisco. And the most important element of this last part of us being together is you, the audience, because you are the experts who are dealing with EBT, and I don't want to make a long speech on EBT. We want to come to answer your questions as fast as possible. What I want to recommend in the way you approach evidence-based training in general, and the equivalence of malfunction in particular, is to always keep the bird's eye of view on the subject. We have a lot of detailed regulation. We have a long list of AMCs, GMs, and in the first quarter of 2022, you will get even an EBT manual. You might easily become lost in the sheer abundance of regulation. If you keep your perspective from the high level in regard what is evidence-based training for, what does it target, what is the high level view, then a lot of solutions will come more easily together and will be easy to understand. That's how we started in 2009 when we started evidence-based training. We had to skip to pass several challenges, and one of them was aircraft malfunctions. I break my speech now for a few seconds and let you guess how many failures does a modern aircraft is able to present to the crews. So if you go to one of the aircraft that are produced today, how many failures? Make a guess. And no, it's not the list of malfunctions you have in the simulator. No, it's not the list of malfunctions you have in the FCOM. There are about up to 2,000 different malfunctions that an aircraft can show its pilots. Now, it's clear that you cannot train all of them. That was not possible in the old system. And we had to decide in the evidence-based training what to do. We need to train the crews. We need to verify if they are proficient to handle the failures. And we want to focus on crew competency to manage and not anymore on the pure technical side. Even Oro FC230, as we have seen, highlights that we have to train major systems in Part 9 FCL. So whatever are major systems, it's not really clear, but definitely in evidence-based training, we have a guideline. Major in regard to malfunction handling are the pilot competencies and the characteristics that we focus in the training for technical malfunctions. So that's the approach we took, and that's what ended up in this list of equivalence, in this principle of equivalence of malfunctions to be trained. And as I promised you, I don't want to go into detail any deeper, because we have heard most of it already by our previous speakers. Let's start with the questions that we have received from you guys in the chat. And there are quite a few that address either EASA, the manufacturers, or to some other audience. There's one question to EASA. For a mixed EBT program, do we need to comply with 3-year major failures or switch to equivalence of malfunctions? Francisco, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so there are two options. Either if you are in legacy, then you follow the traditional approach that I explained before. If you are in EBT mixed, then you can continue using the traditional approach, or you can transition slowly into the equivalency of malfunction. The important element is to know that 1 year before you transition to the full EBT baseline, then 1 year before you need to demonstrate that you did your equivalency of malfunctions. As I said, this is detailed in AMC 1, I think is OFC 231, in which there's the minimum time to join the EBT baseline, and there we say that you need to have a minimum. Sorry, is the AMC 1 Oro FC 231 Alpha 1 is the correct AMC, and here in order to move from EBT mix to EBT Baseline, you need to demonstrate 1 year of valid equivalency of malfunctions. So when you are in legacy, you continue doing legacy. When you are in EBT mix, at the beginning of your EBT mix, you can continue doing legacy and train your all major system malfunctions in a, let's say, in a 3-year program. But then 1 year before you join EBT Baseline, you need to transition to the equivalency of malfunction regulated under this process that we described today. And then you can transition to EBT Baseline. And then you will run the 3-year program as normally. Back to you, Christian.
Thank you. Another question, how prominent should malfunctions be in the EBT program? In the word prominent, there's a lot in it. And let me answer it, because I think this is referring to probably as a solution to what I described in my introduction, introduction message. Everything we do in the EBT program is a vehicle to train competencies. That's true for all other tasks that we associate that we give the crews to solve. The same is for malfunctions. Yes, you have a minimum of 7 different malfunctions within 1 year. That's what Francisco explained us very clearly in his presentation. But considering how much prominent these 7 or even more malfunctions are, always think, how could they be used as a vehicle, as a tool to train the competencies of my crew? So think competency focused and don't think malfunction focused, except for the minimum 7 that we have to train. I hope this answers your questions. I have another one from Fabiano Sipel. It's to Boeing and Airbus. He asks, how relevant is it to understand among each characteristics the magnitude of, let's say, loss of instrumentation? You may lose a few indications or maybe many, which will require different workaround. It may not even be similar to transfer knowledge among cycles, also it is the same characteristics. Do you have any thought? Anything you want to say? Albert, maybe?
Oh, just, do you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So you're right, depending of what remains on the PFD or on the ND, the importance will not be the same. However, Airbus don't want to get deeper in that and let each operators to define how deep they want to get in this kind of failure. We just inform that as soon as you have loss of altitude, for example, then you start to have an impact. After, if we want to lose both, you have another impact that it's up to each operator to determine.
Okay, Boeing, do you want to add something? Okay, so then...
Richard, are you there?
Yeah. Hello? Richard?
I was just getting to all the insight that I had regarding this. We look at those elements in our analysis. We have a long list of assumptions that are referred to by the subject matter experts. However, we do have to build some boundaries on the analysis, because otherwise it could become out of scope in terms of usability. So if we got into too many details. However, I think the list of assumptions that our folks refer to including what they call diff analysis, which is the difficulty, importance, and frequency questions, help them to make really accurate definitions for the common characteristics that we assign to these, for example, failures. And they, in some cases, we don't go into those levels of detail, but it is a very well thought out process.
Okay, thank you. We received one question, the interesting one.
Christian, can I say something here?
Yeah, tell me.
The regulation, because regarding specifically the loss of instrumentation, I would like to remind that we have an AMC, especially AMC1, and maybe I can share my screen with all of you guys. 1 second. Specifically about loss of instrumentation, guys, we have an AMC1 Auto FC 231 Foxtrot 3. I don't know if you can see my screen.
No. Yeah. Okay.
That links this matter of loss of instrumentation. So unless specified in the OSD, each crew member should be exposed to loss of instrumentation in the role of pilot flying. But then what is important is paragraph Bravo, notwithstanding with point alpha for aircraft type with a limited number of malfunctions in these characteristics, because there are some types. I am not talking about the Airbus specifically. I'm talking in general, that there may be some types in which the loss of instrumentation, there's a very limited number of malfunctions, and therefore we already covered this for Bravo. Also, I would like to highlight that in the explanatory note, and I am putting the document here, of the ED decision 2021-002, the one that I always mention, you have specifically some more degradation of control here, loss of instrumentation. You have specifically a much more detailed explanation, or call it whatever you like, in which you can expand this question and other information about loss of instrumentation, because I know that we received several, specifically for loss of instrumentation, we received several questions, not only today, but in previous rulemaking groups and in previous webinar. So please, again, have a look on the ED decision, the explanatory note. Here you have loss of instrumentation. It's around page 92, 93. And then remember about the AMC, specifically point Bravo in AMC1 or FC 231 Foxtrot 3. Back to you, Christian. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah. Just, Christian, just if I can add something, just operators have to pay attention to continue to be realistic when they perform different loss of instrumentation. That means that on some aircraft, if you lose, for example, one instrument, it will mean not only that, you will have consequences after. Take the example of the 380, for example, the 380, if you want to simulate loss of autopilot for ground, you fail the autopilot, which is technically not really possible. The probability is very, 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 very low. The probability to lose autopilot exists, but in that case, you will have other reversion that leads to other. So do try to not create deviation from the capacity of the aircraft by doing malfunction only. All the time, link your malfunction with the capability of the aircraft to be realistic and not create deviations. This is something I wanted to add.
Yeah, very, very important point. Thank you.
Yeah, and this AMC that I explained, it may be served to all of you guys, depending on the type. That as I agree with Albert, if it's not going to be realistic, the agency already foresee possibilities to deviate. Please use them and make your EBT program realistic as possible. Operational risk, following your operational risk, and be relevant on the contextualization of your EBT program, and make something that is realistic and feasible, you know, that for you. So yeah, I agree. Thanks.
We have a question that is more to you, the audience, from one of our participants who asked what were the top 2 or 3 challenges and pains that the operators had when setting up equivalence of malfunction. And I received one answer that I want to share with you. It's from Holger Hoffmann from Lufthansa. He's with us today, but he cannot use the microphone. So I will tell you what they encountered. First challenge: standardization of subject matter experts. Just giving them the EASA definitions and guidance material was not enough and resulted in a significant spread during the Delphi process. So they needed more standardization and also in the Delphi process to have standardized subject matter expert. The second big challenge they encountered, understanding the difference between the FCTS or manufacturer's documents. In Airbus case, it's FCTS, and the operator clustering. In the first round of Delphi, it differed around 40% of the malfunctions from what Airbus has assumed. But after clarification with Airbus experts and also a modification in the EASA GMs that came into force in spring this year, it significantly reduced differences. So those are the 2, I think, for me, it wouldn't have been the most obvious challenges, but standardization of SMEs and how to cater in differences between what the manufacturers propose and what your solutions in your analysis are. One question to Airbus, another one. Interesting. What crew model did you assume when making the FCTS? And I think the same applies for Boeing. What crew model did you take into account when you put yourself into the question significant demand on a proficient crew? Albert, you want to answer?
Yes, thank you, Chris. So for the answer, when we developed the FCTS, we took, we can say, a standard captain and a first officer. Based on that, we assumed that they were applying the standard operating procedures of Airbus. And with this, we consider the increase of capacity needed to deal with each failure. Of course, if an operator does not apply the all standard operating procedure, then they will have to assess again if they did not increase the resource needed for the first officer or for the captain to deal with these procedures.
Okay. Do you consider a crew that is just coming out from a type rating skill test, meaning being brand new on the aircraft, or do you assume some experience?
We assume a crew that is correctly trained on the Airbus SOPs and know the aircraft. It's not a new one, of course. Yeah. So that's why, in accordance with the population targeted by each operator, they will have to readjust our assessment.
Okay, Richard, do you want to add something from Boeing side?
Yes, that's part of our training needs analysis. When we make a definition for the model crew as a proficient crew, besides the industry research, we continue to gather data from our operations and customers and through observations of performance benchmarks. For example, the top pilots that continue to showcase competencies as a template. But we also are mindful of the gaps that sometimes we see in what would otherwise be called proficient pilots. Sort of moderating the top benchmark, but being mindful that a proficient crew demonstrates usually adept application of procedures, for example, We also posit that in order to understand a proficient crew or a model crew for our analysis, that we need to make observations of aviation operations, spending time in the flight decks, observing operations, and this gives us firsthand experience in the challenges of aviation operations in the actual environment. So when we're making definitions of a proficient crew, particularly for the analysis folks who conduct malfunction clustering, for example, we ask what are the characteristics of this group, and so we have a list of that. We do build a range to accommodate individual differences, and we manage a list of training assumptions about a proficient trainee performers. That's a combination of our engineering department and our training. And then, of course, we engage our stakeholders in performance-based learning design, understanding of their insight when it comes to what it means to be a proficient or model crew. And then we validate those requirements of a proficient crew with a target audience that is a real audience that has real challenges, for example. So it's quite an extensive process. There are many considerations that we have when we are making a definition for a model crew. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. A question to EASA following our two manufacturers here. So Airbus and Boeing have provided good material for the operators to start with the equivalence of malfunction analysis. Will EASA encourage other OEMs to create FCTS or similar to FCTS documents?
Yes, obviously we try, but it's a decision at the end of the manufacturer. That's why we do these webinars, and we try to collaborate with the industry. But at the end of the day, it's their decision. We cannot force them to produce. I think from a market point of view, it really makes sense because there are many operators moving to competency-based training, and it makes sense from a market point of view. Otherwise, we also cater the regulation to if there's no possibility and there's no guidance, then we have detailed the Delphi processing, which it could serve as for the purpose of the equivalency of malfunction.
Okay.
Back to you.
Thank you. And directly linked to that, to Boeing, coming from Lufthansa, when will Boeing publish equivalence of malfunctions for 747, 67, 777, and 87? Richard.
Those are in the process of being reviewed by our team, our legal team, for example, at Boeing. So it would be best to get a hold of learning design program, and you can contact me to make that request, and then we can give you more details on the timeline for getting that information to you.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Ramesh De Silva asks something which is addressed to Airbus in regard to the connection between FCTS and the EASA Appendix 9 to part FCL. The question is, can you please explain if there is a connection between the FCTS and Appendix 9 when considering a final skills test after a type rating where certain exercises are to be conducted under sections 3.3 and 3.4 of the test?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Olivier would have been a better capacity than me for this kind of question. So I'm sorry to say that I can't answer. please, Chris, send me send the question to Olivier, and we will try to provide an answer for him.
We will do.
Okay.
Okay. Excellent. So we have had some questions.
One element of this topic of Appendix 9, again, and you know, Albert has said this very clearly. In the Appendix 9, the responsibility is on the examiner and on the authority and on the operator, but especially on the examiner in the chapter 3 point something to address these 3 abnormals and 3 fires. And in this context, legally speaking, the examiner has freedom to choose whatever. Okay. So again, this question obviously will be answered with Olivier, and you can send the email to them. But again, the responsibility from a legal point of view belongs only to the examiner.
To the examiner. Correct.
Yeah.
A lot of questions for the simulator list of malfunctions, and that's quite a complex one, because we know that not one simulator is the same as the other one, even if it's the same type, even the same type version. You may have one simulator who has a different list of malfunctions from the other ones in regard to completeness and in regard to details. One question is how much variation in FSTD malfunction capabilities does Airbus and Boeing see or know? And how would this affect the FSTD capability to cater for equivalency of malfunctions? Albert, you want to answer first, or Richard?
Sure, this is Richard with Boeing. Well, first of all, we do a life cycle analysis of the devices that we're prescribing for training because we realize that there may be needs to update those to better meet the needs of training. And as you mentioned, there's much variation, for example, in iOS capabilities, instructor operating station capabilities, for example. And which non-normals can be practiced in which simulators. So one way, of course, is that we can look at similar non-normals that have similar cluster characteristics to train those if there's a missing capability inside of a simulator. But we fully support full fidelity, so we'd like to see more fidelity added to the simulators. It's something that we look at on a regular basis. The other thing that we find is important is we conduct what we call device optimization analysis, and really the point of that is that we want to understand fully the degree of realism that's necessary for specific training objectives. In other words, for each training competency and task, what are the necessary cues like kinesthetic, visual, tactical that are required for a device? And so that analysis is ongoing, and it contributes to our decisions about what we believe is necessary to best meet the needs of training and to ensure training effectiveness. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Albert?
Yes, so on our side is quite the same. We perform a constant analysis of the novelties that appear on our products, and that's why we develop a new data package. And each time there is a new data package, we analyze deeply the novelties and the necessity to introduce new failure in accordance with the training level and the associated characteristic that can be emphasized by this. So, however, the list cannot be with the, as you mentioned, with the 2000 failure capable, because some are not very useful. and there is a cost behind that, so we'll have to pay. We receive also feedback from airlines on their needs, and after we decide in accordance with our other feedback from aircraft, see if it is deemed necessity to insert this failure in the malfunction. There is a malfunction description document, the MDD, that is delivered by your GO5 in the SIMPAC, and this list can be adapted, of course, in accordance.
Yeah, and we should not forget the important element of the training device manufacturers, who also play a filtering role, because they have a catalog of malfunctions that might be not even the full capability that the OEM of the aircraft is providing to them. So you as a customer dealing with the training device manufacturers, you have really some creativity to ask for failures and really ask your training device manufacturers to provide you the failures in the right way on the iOS and in the right context. They might have more than they propose you in the beginning.
Yeah, you're right, Chris. Yeah, we have the training device manufacturers that is having his own catalog of malfunction that do not represent mandatory the whole capacity of the aircraft, of the simulator. So.
Thank you, Albert. Question to EASA from Jenny Taggart. Would you say that equivalency of malfunction is something that only your program developers should be educated on, or should your instructors be educated in the concept as well, so that they better understand the reasons for certain items being included in the session and can maybe use this information in the grading and debriefing process? Very good question.
Indeed, it's a very good question. There's no clear answer about it. The regulation is very clear that the operator needs to, but then who is the operator and who is exactly that particular guy? So in the regulation, there's no indication about this. I was gonna check. I think it's from a safety point of view and from a knowledge point of view. Obviously, it's good that the instructor knows about this and you know what it means, a significant demand on a proficient crew and all that thing. I was checking in AMC1 AutoFC 146 Charlie, which is the program for the EBT instructor. We don't specifically say in paragraph Charlie you have the points of learning objectives, let's say, for the instructor course, and there's no specifically something that it points out directly to the equivalency of malfunction. And that's what I need to say from a regulatory point of view. Christian, I think you are probably more suitable.
Yeah, we have one indirect, very, very powerful tool in the malfunction clustering. This is the Delphi method. And the Delphi method suggests that for an average operator, about 50% of the trainers should take part in the Delphi process. If you choose that 50% as your standardizers, at least, and the instructors who usually train the other instructors, then you have already half of your population who is deeply involved in selecting the malfunctions. And as the Delphi process is something which creates a lot of discussions, because you have several rounds and you have to argue, you have to justify, you have to defend, then this thinking into this malfunction equivalency is really triggered excellent. But it's not a general standardization principle, but at least for a big portion of your instructors. Okay.
Maybe Christian, for the EBT manual, we could, explain maybe a little bit better, or try to think up twice and give a turn on this matter.
I mean, there is no limitation for the 50%. I agree. So the Delphi method is an excellent tool to develop the awareness of the instructors in regard to complexity and equivalency of malfunctions. And so that's a good idea. Thank you. I take the note.
And this is Richard with Boeing.
Richard, go.
At Boeing, we publish the concept of malfunction clustering to both instructors and to students, so that they understand the complexity associated with the common characteristics, for example. But we feel like that adding that insight is really crucial to instructors and even to students. So I just wanted to share that. Our publication is called Building Resilience, in which we share that information.
Thank you, Richard. And we have quite a few questions on training on lower devices, but I'd like to take the opportunity to hand over to Frederick, that he can manage those questions.
Yeah, we can.
Frederick.
That sounds like a plan, Christian. There's actually one more question on the previous section that actually might be interesting to close off on, and that was one from Tak Watanabe. In these days, the malfunction installed in the FCD has been identified within the OEM simulator data package. On the other hand, depending on the operator adopting AQP, who will arrange the malfunctions based on their SMS. How does the OEM think about the malfunction clustering that the operation will do himself? I think we've covered this to some extent, but it might just be interesting to reflect on this, and maybe with Richard and Albert. I mean, to what extent do you believe that that, you know, looking at malfunctions also from an SMS point of view, or does this change the data packages, or, you know, how can that be catered for in data packages? That's kind of, I believe, the question. So that might be actually the first question, maybe just for Richard. You know, do we think that we can have data packages that cater for malfunction lists that might change from operator to operator?
You mean if we can adapt the data package to each to operators' needs? In fact, this is what you.
Yeah, I think this is what the question is meaning, but maybe you can read it for yourself. It's in the chat, I believe.
Yeah. So Airbus, when we receive a request from an operator to add a new functionality, of course, we take it into account, and it's possible to adapt and to develop this new malfunction in accordance with the need of an operator, but it is considered as a service and not a support. That means that, except if it's something that is truly relevant and need to be addressed in our data package if something was missing, in that case, it will be a support, or else it's considered as a service.
And this is Richard with Boeing. We have a fairly standard list of malfunction clustering analysis. The way we look at it too is that looking at competency gaps is part of the picture as well. So in some cases, that might mean that a custom counsel for another operator would mean that we would provide insight about how to develop pilot competencies to negotiate the non-normals, which is really the focus of training. So if we are using malfunction clustering correctly, then it should help us to define pilot competencies. And in some cases, that may mean for a particular operator an adaptive competency model that better meets their needs. And that happens in sort of coordination and counsel with Boeing.
Okay. That, if I believe, but if that doesn't answer the question, then I ask Dr. Watanabe to continue on the question. But I think this reflects that, you know, there's absolutely the possibility to flex simulator data packages to the needs of an operator. And I think also if the equivalency of malfunction lists change a lot between operators, that that might be a possibility. But it's I think in terms of equivalence concepts, the concept of equivalence, we're not going to see a huge necessity for radical different data packages from one sim to the next. So maybe just moving on to sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add that thanks to the equivalence of malfunction, when the company requests a new malfunction in the simulators, maybe it's an opportunity for them to check if this competency they want to check cannot be performed by another malfunction that lead to have exactly the same thing. Previously, before the class of equivalence, there was no possibility for them to know if they were assessing this competency right way. But here, maybe they can change the request on the malfunction because it already exists 4 or 5 different malfunctions that can lead to the same competencies.
Exactly, because you're looking at the competency training need, or you're looking at the characteristics training need, and you're not looking at the individual malfunctions.
Yeah, exactly, Frederick.
The only thing I think is you need to create enough variation. So a sim package within a specific malfunction characteristic should have enough malfunctions that you could provide elements of surprise. But this is getting into scenario design as well.
Yeah.
Francisco, you're raising your hand on this point.
Yeah, I would like to point out something on the regulation. The regulation does not mandate that the malfunction equivalency of malfunction process has to be linked to the SMS. So there's no link in the regulation whatsoever. The link of the SMS into the EBT program, this is a difference between ATQP, or ATQP we call it in EASA, AQP in the US. There's a difference here between AQP and EBT, because the link of the SMS is driven what I said at the beginning of my presentation. We are focusing the EBT program on the operational risk, and the SMS is contextualizing the program. And this is the link. We put the link on the SMS in the operational, it's called contextualization of the EBT program in the regulation. What we mean is that in the example scenario elements, in how you develop the EBT program, the SMS needs to be embedded there, but not specifically in the malfunction clustering or in the equivalency of malfunction, but at the program level, not at the equivalency of malfunction level, okay? So this has to be clear, and I remind you that in AMC1, AutoFC 231 alpha, whatever, which is this AMC that gives the gate between EBT mixed and EBT program, we specifically have a point in which we say that in order to become EBT baseline, you need to contextualize and link your SMS into your EBT program. But this is from a program level, so a little bit up there, rather than in the mini scope of the equivalency of malfunction. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, from a regulatory point of view.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's also part of the question here as well. So thank you for touching on that, Francisco. So one of the questions that came in from, I think, Peter de Jager, would it be correct that the MMTL tables in the Airbus FCTS were not intended for design of recurrent training? I think this connects very much into your presentation, but would you be able to answer that question for
Can you tell again the question, please, because I was cut when you were saying.
No problem. Would it be correct that the MMTL tables in the Airbus FCTS were not intended for design of recurrent training, EBT or FC231?
It can be used for the EBT, the MMTL. It's part of the EBT, as I explained in my presentation. It's used for the class of equivalence. And when you look at demanding after, mainly they are in the level E for that means FFS, so that respects the recurrent training program. Yeah.
So maybe a follow-up question on that. I think what's interesting is we look at training on lower level devices, as Francisco had indicated in his presentation. we have, of course, the list of malfunctions that place a significant demand on the crew, and some of those will be trained within the FFS or the FSTD program, the EBT program, and maybe those 14 or seven malfunctions that Francisco indicated. But then we also have other malfunctions that provide a significant demand, and those need to be trained for procedural knowledge, but those can be trained in other environments as well. How does that connect with the MMTL tables that you've set up? To what extent, should I say, some of these we'll put into the simulator and some of them we're going to train into a classroom. Does that MMTL table then also, how do they combine that with the MMTL table?
So the MMTL give the training level associated with the fellow, and that's all. It doesn't mean that it has to be trained mandatory. Our feeling is that those malfunctions should be addressed according to a level of the specific procedural knowledge, and not addressed during an EBT FSTD program. For example, you have emergency landing is not addressed in a FSTD program in Airbus, but it's level E for FFS. Does it mean that you need to plan an emergency landing in the FFS or a level C? Do you have to perform this in an APT? Not mandatory. The MMTL just give the associated training level in accordance with the malfunction. It doesn't mean that that have to be trained.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying. And there's another question by Mr. Diago. What are the expert opinions concerning the impact of the update of flight simulation training devices, MPA 2015, the RMT 0196? Francisco, maybe you want to jump in on this one. Do you think there's a connection between, there was also mention, I think, of ABLE in those regulations about training on lower level devices?
Yeah, so we identified quite soon when we initiated the EBT rulemaking task 0599, and for that we invited Anneke Naben from the NLR and other experts to try to develop, a more flexible and this aviation learning environment concept to be developed. Unfortunately, due to the restrictions of the public world, and the bureaucracy and all the regulatory elements that we need to face, this process was a little bit lag behind, and it was decided to move to the rulemaking task 0196 because they had a little bit more resources. Unfortunately, this rulemaking task is being dragged along and, let's say, delayed due to the unavailability of experts, especially the COVID and other circumstances has impacted this rulemaking task. But we originally, from the beginning, we saw that this has to be necessary. I already explained this, I said between today and 5 years before in the question that another person made during my session. But this is the idea. Rulemaking task 0196 is now developing just the MPA was published in 2020. They are now dealing with the questions and the CRD. There has been many comments, and hopefully at some point the working package number 1 will be completed. Then unfortunately, the ABLE concept is for working package 2 and 3, which is not yet, the MPA is not yet feasible this year. So we will need to have some patience, and the ABLE concept and the update of all these requirements will take, as I said, I hope that is no more than 5 years, but we need to all think that in aviation, and especially in a regulatory environment like us, it's going to take time. And unfortunately, I cannot give you a specific date, but it's in the DNA of the rulemaking task 0599 and in EBT to move forward and become a bit more flexible with the use of FSTD. But we cannot, I am not able to provide a deadline now and give a clear deadlines.
But it might be possible that in the future, the regulation can change the requirements.
However, I would recommend as well that we have this part of the regulations in AMC and ALMOC, and it's always possible if it's super needed, and we see that there's a specific need, then we could use the ALMOC process for this purpose. On the meantime, okay. Perfect. Back to you.
So there's a few more questions coming in. I think I want to cover a few more before we close. One question here, Christian, maybe you can actually jump in on this one. It's a question from Martin Rosener. Is anybody aware of the initiative that maps the malfunction characteristics to the pilot competencies, or vice versa? So mapping malfunction characteristics to the pilot competencies. You've mentioned competencies and malfunctions, but are they actually mapped to each other at some point, or?
The competencies are the toolbox that you apply to master your malfunctions. The malfunction characteristics are just putting kind of a color for it. Are used to differentiate the malfunctions in regard to what tools do we want to challenge in particular. So merging the both of them would not bring a big benefit in my eyes, because they're two completely different objectives why they were created.
Yeah, can I say something? During the rulemaking task, I don't know, I can't remember this one specifically. We put it in the explanatory note of the ED decision 002, 2021-002. But I remember having these discussions in the rulemaking group, because the rulemaking group went through this idea. At the end, the conclusion was that very high level, and I am not the expert, I'm just a listener there in the rulemaking groups, and I try to my job is to try to compromise, the different views of the group and create a regulation that serves for the whole Europe. But the idea is that the characteristics is something more for the program designer and from a EBT program design, but it's not a tool that it can be used in a real aircraft, in a real crew. The crew cannot have this, I am very good in immediacy. You are not very good in immediacy. This is not a tool that the pilot, or a characteristic of the pilot, I am good in immediacy or in whatever. What you can be good, or what the tool that the pilots use are the competencies. So, we talk about complexity and then maybe problem solving and decision making, but it's a completely different view and a completely different thing. The characteristics is the characteristics for the program design, and to see what malfunctions and how the malfunction can be equivalent together, cluster being together, malfunction clustering. And the other one is the real crew, the real, what we train the crew for, and what the crew are good at, which is in these competencies. Yep. So we have a discussion, but we decided not to make a link between them, because it will confuse the people, and it's a completely different thing. No,
yeah. Not. It's context. It provides context. There are characteristics of a situation in which someone can develop or showcase their competencies. And we must also not forget malfunctions are one part of a scenario, one part of a module. So there are many other aspects that play into this that can challenge a competency, one competency or the other. So a specific malfunction in isolation is interesting, but it is always within context of where they're flying, what flight phase there is, what's happened before, what's happening next. And so depending on how you change those, the same context, even though we still have the complexity, it can still put pressure on different competencies, depending on how those other factors are tuned. So it's also, I think, necessary that we don't tie them together too explicitly. There's another question, I think, also from Martin. He's expanding on this a little bit and saying, can we, if we had such a mapping, we could use malfunctions to train or develop specific competencies. I think that's true, but I think that goes with any other scenario element. or any other topic or context that we can develop. Those are, depending on how we use them, we can train specific competencies. But I wouldn't look at it one by one because it's part of a larger context. There's another question here from Georgios that's coming in about how do we determine exactly when do we say there's a proficient, there's a demand on a proficient crew, significant demand on a proficient crew. Albert, you expanded on this, I believe, in your presentation already by showing a table in which you looked at four different load factors on a crew member. And then based on that, you would gauge is this
Yeah.
on all the factors? If I saw that correctly.
Yeah, in fact, just to help a little bit, we in Airbus on the ATO side, when they developed recurrent, they consider a procedure as demanding when you reach the level 3. Why? Because when you have the class 3, you tick the box of the workload. And this is why our Airbus consider. So 3 and above have to be considered as significant. And if you look at the 3, I'm not 100% sure, but most of the procedures classified with of the tick of the workload, they have to be trained on the FFS. That means with a psychological effect added to only the question of dealing with procedures. There is a psychological effect also on that.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. And I think we've lost Richard, I believe, on the call.
Yeah, we lost Richard. He sent me an email. Regarding this topic, I would like to highlight in the regulation that, again, in the regulation, we have a GM. Let me check the number. GM1 Auto FC 231 Foxtrot.
Yep.
In which you can see a little bit more this reference. And then here it is. I don't know if you can see GM1 Auto FC 231, significant demand on a proficient crew, in which you can get an idea of what we are talking about. And also here in the Delphi process, we again, we have recommended, some ideas, especially in point Delta and in point Bravo. Here it provides a little bit more insight on what in the ED decision as well. And again, it's a reference that needs to be put by the operator with the guidance of the manufacturer, as it says here in Alpha. And there they will decide whether if they point from 1 to 5 or point 1 to 3, or depending on the scale they detail, then this will be the trigger to say, okay, this is a significant demand and this is not. Back to you.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, to add to that, I mean, it depends on the operation, depends on the crew you have as well. We have, of course, a proficient crew, but we have to consider that in different operations you find that you'll have different malfunctions will have a different effect on those crews. And so you always need to redefine what is that, what is it for my crews? What is it for my operation? So what Albert is thinking is a load on a proficient crew a little different than what Christian or what Francisco is thinking of this, because we would have different takes on that. So it's important to go through that Delphi process again and to have that exchange. That's part of standardization. So setting standards within your operation.
You're perfectly right, Frederic, and that's why we say that it's up to the operator to determine the level, because let's assume you have an operator that is having only instructors that deal all the time with the procedures like dual hydraulic in the simulators. They are perfectly trained on that subject. Is it really a demanding procedures to perform dual hydraulic when you are well trained, when you are flying manually, when you know how to fly raw data, and in fact it's your daily life? Not sure. Maybe it's not so complex for them. You have a brand new first officer in the company, you have new captain, because you have a turnover that is very high, and your first officer are getting captain very fast. In that company, the demanding may be slightly different than on the other one. That's why the Airbus 3 is really our view, but it's not mandatory what has to be done by each company.
Christian, can you maybe add on that a little bit? What would you say to an operator that is going into this process and they might have an initial equivalency, a list of equivalent of malfunctions list? But as they go into EBT, they start experiencing, is it really that challenging or not? How would they have to then adjust this list, or how would they go forward with this?
List can be dynamic, of course, but if you assume the multiplication in different options, also taking into account the matrix of FC 232, where you have the malfunctions plus the malfunction characteristics, plus the significant demand on the proficient crew, you have so many options that I don't think it is important to really make this paramount to review the list. There's always training benefit, and a procedure that one time has been challenging for a proficient crew will never become a piece of cake unless you always train the same scenario under the same conditions, under the same like we did our famous one engine out exercise in Appendix 9 part FCL, which is clearly a copy paste.
Right. So we don't think we're going to fall into that same trap as well.
No.
I think we're just really on the tag of end of our time here. Before I hand it over to Francisco, I'll hand it over with a question. There were two questions that touch on the same topic, one from Ricci Toyota and one from Michael Green. How does this connect into type rating? So type rating into CBTA, do we expect, for instance, that we will have the function clustering also in type rating, CBTA type rating courses, or maybe in regular type rating courses? Could you maybe reflect on that, Francisco?
Yeah, so this is foreseen for rulemaking task 0599, phase 2. Originally in the European Plan for Aviation Safety last year, it was to be started next year, early next year, and first quarter 2022. Unfortunately, due to my situation with other rulemaking tasks in fuel and the restructuring that COVID and several things, we have discussed with our management, and the rulemaking task will start on the second semester, which is about third quarter or fourth quarter next year. So the terms of reference of this phase 2 will be published around October, November, around that time next year. And we will start the rulemaking task 0599 phase 2, in which we will discuss it's our intention to make EBT type rating courses. Let's see how far we go and how much competency based we can do, depending on the experts and the nominations and the group rulemaking group. In this context, obviously, regarding the current section 3 of Appendix 9, which is part of the type rating program, it will be discussed, and we hope that we can introduce the concept of equivalency of malfunctions into the type rating courses. This is our intention. Let's see how the rulemaking group, thinks is going to be appropriate. What is going to be the process on the basis of the concept? So yes, it will be obviously clarify with the terms of reference, but this is the intention of the agency to move to a rulemaking task 0599 phase 2, in which we will detail the operator conversion course, including the type rating. The type rating means also malfunction clustering. Okay, and we will discuss there at that point. So I hope that covers up. We need to go, Frederick. Please, I give the floor now to Frederick, Christian, and Albert to say goodbye before I give the floor to John. So Frederick, Christian, and Albert, please.
So, thank you very much for this opportunity. It was very nice, and we are enjoying sharing our idea on the subject and supporting IASA and also airlines because it's at the core of our business, and that's really important for us.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Christian?
you. I always love to talk to you guys from the industry, from my colleagues personally, but even in regard to this format that we had today, it was a very colorful interaction. And thank you for all of you. A big number of participants, big number of questions to take part. And obviously, we are not disappeared. We are all there. So if you have questions, come on, send me a mail, send Francisco or Frederick a mail, and we will be happy to answer.
Thank you, Christian. Frederick?
Well, again, it's been a pleasure to do this with you all, and I think this is definitely an initiative to take forward on the other topics. I think it's key to remember we had 4 takeaways, Christian and I, which I'll share verbally. The OEMs provide an excellent starting point, I think, for malfunction, equivalence, and malfunctions. Use the starting point, but you have to think for yourself. You have to reflect, how does this apply? You have to operationalize it. That's the second point. The third point is you need to reflect, is it possible to do this in my FSCD? How are those equipped to do this? And the last is, of course, you train some of these malfunctions in terms of equivalency to cover the equivalencies, and then the other ones you still train for the procedural knowledge. And I think the guidance material that's also upcoming, also in part by the ATPG, I think is excellent. The EBT Manual, so look out for that. And we'll see you, I think, at the next one. So
thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Arbaz. Thank you, Boyne. And I don't know if there's another representative. No, because Sasha and Richard has disconnected now. So we are already 2 minutes late. So thank you very much again to the ATPG, to the NLR and Airbus and Boyne for this wonderful meeting. I give the floor to John Franklin, the head of safety promotion, to give you more updates on the next coming EBT webinar that will come in 2022. Back to you, John. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, thanks, and huge thanks to everybody, particularly our panelists and everybody involved, and also everybody who joined and stayed with us for the whole session. This kind of activity is really at the heart of what we're trying to do with our safety promotion program now. So the whole goal of our safety promotion is to engage people in positive conversations that help improve safety, and it's these conversations that are really at the heart of what we're trying to do. Given the time, I won't take too long, but particularly just to remind everybody that we're going to have the next session, as Francisco said, on the 24th of March. We'll set that up and open that up before Christmas for registration and advertise that. And please, feel free to share the links with as many people you know, both for the registration for the upcoming event and also for the EBT page on the AirOps community site. And we'll continue to update that. And I think we're getting to the point where we might need to have a second level of structure. But please, if anybody ever needs anything or has any questions, please engage with me. Either drop me a message on LinkedIn or to our safety promotion at easa.europa.eu email address. Fantastic. Thanks very much, everybody. And I think that's it. We'll bring this event to a close. Thank you. Have a great weekend and a great Christmas, everyone.